My name is John, and on Farcaster, I'm at No. I got into crypto in around 2020. I heard about it on a podcast in a way that made me want to dive in. Essentially, the guy on the podcast said, Bitcoin's going to go up soon, so you should probably buy some. And so I thought, why not? I bought some and then I watched the price go up and decided I better learn more about this. At the time, I was at medical school and I was also working on a climate change project. And so I kind of used that as an excuse to go relatively deep compared to what my expertise were in up to that point and learn more about crypto in general. Because I thought maybe there was a chance that a parallel financial system might be a good way to transition from traditional energy economies. I don't know if that'll happen. At that point, I just had an account on Coinbase, but at a certain point, I kind of got into more, through that research, I got into more, I think they were calling it fourth industrial revolution type tokens. They were kind of dystopian, to be honest. Eventually stumbled upon ETH and that kind of ethos, which resonated with me a lot more. Went a bit deeper into that and kind of transitioned into that kind of stuff. And now I'm on Farcaster, generally trying to support people to live the lives they want to live.
Nice. Well, appreciate you sharing that. Are you still doing any of like the medical stuff or climate stuff, or mostly have moved on from that? You know, it's 5 years later now since I think that point in your life when you had discovered crypto in the first place.
Yeah. So at medical school, I was kind of went into that because I was interested in the connection between mind and body, and also kind of wanted to do something with my life that would kind of help people. So those themes have kind of continued into what I do now. I'm trained as a mindfulness meditation teacher. Done 2 trainings over just over 2 years. And the climate change stuff would have been kind of the second year maybe after I really started getting anxious about the future, which was the kind of starting point of my meditation career.
Hey, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Oh, sorry. I thought it got cut off. I can cut that a little bit out, but so moved on from the medical school to more of directly studying sort of mind-body connection with these meditation training. Can you say more about what that was?
Yeah, so I trained once with through a program that these teachers called Jack Cornfield and Tara Brach put on. Jack Cornfield's kind of a teacher who's in the Thai Buddhist or Thai forest Buddhist tradition. And he's now kind of mostly working in America. He set up this retreat center, I think, called Spirit Rock. And then Tara Brach is someone who's kind of more, her background's more in yoga. So she spent a lot of time in India, whereas Jack was more in like Thailand and Burma or Cambodia. No?
Yeah, I've heard of Jack Cornfield, I think through Tim Ferriss.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if he's had him on the podcast or something, but the name rings a bell. I probably listened to a podcast with him I don't know, several years ago or something. But what does like the training itself actually entail? Like you mentioned, I think a couple of years was sort of the duration of it. Was it, is that doing that on the side of doing other stuff and it's something like a hobby? Not to downplay the significance of it or the importance in your life, but just generally speaking, like something that you're doing for a little bit of time for over a couple of years, or is it like an all-encompassing thing or something in between?
Yeah, so it's mostly it's kind of got uh, a weekly kind of touch in with some kind of like real time something or other, plus kind of a lot of asynchronous content. And then, yeah, it was something I was doing alongside my medical degree at first. So you don't have to like dive all the way in. And then there's kind of additional, you've got to do retreats and lead classes for them to eventually certify you, essentially. But yeah, it's one of those programs that didn't require me to go on like a super long retreat, but I could go relatively deep and really kind of strengthen my own practice. When I was doing it initially, I wasn't really looking to become a teacher. I kind of just wanted to deepen my own practice and understand kind of like how people teach it and like what the theory is behind that rather than um, teaching myself. But then I found out that you had to do some teaching to qualify. So that ended up being part of the path.
Interesting. And what was your, well, like, what was the history of your practice up to that point when you began this? Like you mentioned, you know, the motivation being to deepen your own practice. What was the history of that? Like, had you been meditating since you were a kid? You picked it up later as you started having this, you know, fear about the future. What was like sort of the history of getting into meditation and the like in the first place?
I think like the earliest kind of touch point would have been at church, and they would sing this hymn that was "Be still for the presence of the Lord," and that hymn always like got to me, or like I always felt like, oh, this is kind of special that everybody's being still in this moment. So I like
As
to
a
think that
kid,
might have been like where it started. Yeah, as a kid. Um,
like a young kid?
yeah, like maybe um 5 or 6, something like that.
Oh, wow.
I just remember just like that was my tune when I was growing up. I'm not like I listened to it in other times, but when that came on in church or when people started to sing it in church, I was like, yeah, this is the ones I like. Uh,
Nice.
and then
And it's
maybe,
not, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, so later on, essentially I just started learning about meditation or hearing about it through Joe Rogan, like in 2012 or something, or Duncan Trussell, like they talk about psychedelics and meditation on the podcast. Maybe it was even when Brian Redban was on there. Um, and eventually, when I got to university, I started feeling really anxious because I was kind of like in a new city with lots of new people who didn't really have the same kind of. I was basically in dropped into a new culture, trying to learn a new way of being myself, which I wasn't very good at that time. And so I got really anxious and started using it as kind of like a help me with the stress. So I'd use it in kind of like emergency situation, just go back to my little room and meditate. And then at a certain point, the anxiety got so bad that I went a lot deeper into the meditation practice, wanted to learn a lot more so that it could kind of maintain some stability through all kinds of situations, essentially.
Was it helping immediately, or like you mentioned, you know, the anxiety got so bad, you went deeper, the anxiety was getting worse at first, even as you were meditating, or it just sort of hit a boiling point and then you started meditating and things started to improve, maybe not linearly, but generally from that point forwards?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think at the beginning, I think maybe it was more of like I was doing nervous system calming. So just deeper breaths was kind of like helping me to kind of level out. But then I also think maybe looking back, it was increasing my capacity to feel intense things. And because I was kind of questioning what I wanted to do in my life, because I wasn't fully envisioning being a doctor as being a happy life for myself. I was doing a lot of reading, and that's when I started to come into contact with like more dystopian kind of future predictions and stuff. I wasn't feeling too good about the future of the world at that point. So when those things started piling up on top of kind of just normal day to day stresses, then it's kind of got to a more of a breaking point for me.
You use like the past tense in saying, you know, the future wasn't looking so bright for you back then. Has that changed, or do you just not think about the future quite as much, or, it hasn't changed, but you just sort of accept it'll be what it'll be? Like, what's your relationship with the future years later now, having had this practice, which sounds like it's been very beneficial for you in a lot of ways?
Yeah, I think maybe that time I felt like a bit of a victim in relation to the future. Like I couldn't stop what was coming. And that is true in a certain sense, but I think I've taken a little bit more responsibility now. I'm more willing to kind of accept and take on the more difficult feelings and kind of work with what is present now to kind of make the best of the situation and move conditions towards a future I'd like to be part of.
Was it a lot of, 'cause I know you got involved with the climate stuff. Was it a lot of, climate related concern, or AI, or different things? And maybe it was kind of all of the above, but were there like a few top things, or one or two that were kind of the big things that were kind of scary sitting in the future?
Yeah, so the big three for me at the time were climate change, AI, and wealth inequalities, like a widening
Right.
gap.
Right. And how has your view changed or not changed on those?
I think with climate change, maybe I'm more positive about the technology that could help us there, alongside maybe a confidence in humans' ability to adapt. I feel like there might be, there's a certain amount of um, slowness to things so far that might mean we have to just deal with some shit that happens. In regards to AI, I'm not sure I understood it that well then. And I'm not sure I understand it that well now. But through my own kind of understanding of I guess how systems function, I'm kind of optimistic that a being or a something that's more intelligent than us would probably also be compassionate in some sense. And then wealth inequalities is something that I am really not too sure how to think about at the moment, to be honest. But I know at the beginning of my moving towards crypto, I started thinking about crypto in terms of wealth distribution, or kind of like events that kind of distribute wealth, but really not too sure how to think about it, to be honest.
Yeah. With AI, it's interesting. I, at a similar time, actually, in 2020, I had just left my first job out of school and had like, tons of time, especially once COVID hit. And I decided basically I'm not going to try to find my next thing right now. It's like kind of the worst time in the world to look for like a new job. So I'm just gonna, and I had moved back into my family home. My brother had done the same, and we were living together in New York. We got really lucky and bought rented an apartment together. And that was supposed to be my, like, when we did that, I'd come back from some travel after quitting, and that was supposed to be my, like, okay, moving back into New York. My brother was working in New York. We're gonna, move in together, and I'm gonna find a job. And then COVID hit at like maybe 45 days into our lease, and we got pretty lucky because we were looking at, in the same building, at 2 units. One was a 4-month lease and one was 24, and we just looked at the 4 as being basically 16. We figured we'd just get it and then renew it. But when COVID hit, like a month and a half in, we moved out and moved home, and my brother's company had a bunch of layoffs, so both of us were out of work, and it became like a very pleasant and surprising time, I would say. You don't really expect to have time with your family at home soon after graduating college, in like this unusual time of COVID. That was, everything just slowed down a ton. So it was interesting. And during that time, I was basically running and writing and reading. And with the reading, and the writing to some extent, particularly, I was like sort of going down a few different rabbit holes that I had sort of had in my peripherals, but just didn't really have the time or didn't make the time to, you know, get into it all while I was working. And that was basically crypto and longevity and climate change. And I don't know, like I went, I got pretty into the climate stuff for really just a few months or so, and just sort of came out with the, sort of perspective that this is a lot more, there's a lot less black and white than I had sort of understood it to be. And there's a lot of questions here that I don't really know the answer to after learning more. Like the more you learn, the less I knew in a way. Because if you don't dig into it, you just, the headline is climate change is really bad and coming fast. And we're either all screwed if we don't fix it quickly, or we've already actually passed the point where we're all screwed and there's nothing you can do about it. Neither of which is a very pleasant, perspective. Yeah. And so after sort of getting that conclusion of like, hey, there's a lot of actually like sort of pretty reasonable seeming people on a bunch of different sides of this thing. And because I don't know, I'm probably just better off not choosing the perspective that everything is screwed. Because like, if I don't know, then, and it didn't seem to me that I could know either. Which is different, because if you can know, then you're just sort of like choosing ignorance. But I was like, I don't think I can really know here. I can keep going further and further and deeper and learning more and more. I'm probably convincing myself to get conviction in some certain perspective. But in general, I was like, I don't really know. This is a very long-term thing. We're talking about like the changing of the climate of the earth. So I'm just going to kind of put this one on the back burner for now. It seemed more political in a way than anything else. Not to say that I really agree with either side necessarily, certainly not completely. And so anyway, I sort of put that to bed. But then crypto obviously took a lot of my interest and has only continued since. And then lastly, longevity was super interesting. This was, like I said, 2020. So it really like the core thing that was interesting to me wasn't so much like put your blue light goggle or, blue light glasses on at night or whatever, and like do the sauna and stuff. Well, it's interesting. I respect that stuff. It's fine. Maybe I'll get into it at some point. I've kind of gotten into some of it at various points, but the part that was more interesting to me was actually this sort of novel concept that we could approach the problem, quote unquote, of aging directly and slow or even potentially reverse aging. And that every sort of disease, every cause of death is basically downstream of aging. Not every single one, but the majority of them, to the point where, like, if we were to cure all forms of cancer, it wouldn't meaningfully, I don't have like the name of the study or whatever top of mind, but I've read that basically, and actually, interestingly enough, Vitalik has quoted this specific stat before, I believe, which is like, if we cured all cancers, the expected lifespan wouldn't actually increase that dramatically, because it would just be people would just die of heart attacks and get Alzheimer's, and like the next thing would basically get them. And the same goes for obviously any of those. Like, you have to get all of those, which is really, really hard, and we've been working on for decades with tons and tons of money. Or we could take a stab at aging itself, which has actually not been very well funded at all, or worked on for very long at all. And it's sort of like a new thing. And to me, I was like, man, that seems really interesting. Like, you slow aging by 20%, extend health span by 20% without even having to do anything about cancer or heart attack. And it gives you that much more time to look into those things and whatever. So that was really interesting. I haven't been thinking of it as much as of late, but I really like it. And it's also sort of been commandeered by like Brian Johnson, which I think is net good because it brings attention to the issue. But his style of, approaching the issues, not exactly mine, to say the least. And nor are his values necessarily aligned with mine. And so I'll bring this, but I do share certain values with him, I think, and I definitely respect various elements of what he's doing. And like I said, I think it's not good. And I will finally bring this full circle. I know it's a bunch of tangents and sort of long-winded, but I can actually sort of do this with Brian Johnson, which is basically the thing that I didn't spend any time really looking at back then or getting into. And really, I've gotten into it as much as the next guy, but it hasn't been extraordinarily interesting to me is AI. And I think part of the reason is I just don't really, it's really cool. Like it's, lets you do all these cool things. I'm doing them just like everyone else or whatever. ChatGPT is like seemingly a miracle, and, all these tools for design and code and whatever. But I don't love it generally, basically. And I think the reason for that is fundamentally, if I were to sort of state my largest fear of the future beyond like technologically related, at least, it's definitely like sort of in the AI camp. And I think it's largely around, what happens when like sort of humans are no longer sort of like the dominant species. And that can come about in whether it's like sort of AI related, or it could also be, like Brian Johnson sort of thing of like, sort of the aim is to like live long enough to, for lack of a better word, like become a piece of software or something. And I don't know. It's like he had a really good point that I like sort of read once, which was like, the prior evolution isn't going to look forward to the next one, but the next one would never want to go back to the prior, something like that. And so I don't really know how to look at it all, but I'm, at the end of the day, sort of with you in that, like, I don't exactly know what to think about AI. I don't particularly believe anyone who claims that they do. And so at the end of the day, it's like, I don't know how productive it is to even think about some of that. On the other hand, if you want to think about the future at all, which I do, it's sort of silly to do so, to project a future forward that doesn't, have sort of a view on where AI is going, to sort of have everything else right. But if AI does something ridiculous in 5 years or something, like all your other predictions are kind of moot if they don't sort of account for it. So I don't know, that's a huge brain dump, but maybe you have some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, when you get into like things that are more intelligent than us, it's like the idea is, I guess, they can think thoughts that we couldn't think. So how can you predict what they would do? It becomes kind of like just zaps the future thinking. Like if they truly are going to be that much more intelligent than us and do things that we couldn't think of doing, then how do you predict at all?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's sort of, what's the point, basically? If if you think that you're almost definitely going to be wrong, basically. But yeah, I'm curious. I mean, it's interesting, like right when we jumped on the phone, um, you like sound very sort of peaceful, which is nice. And I don't know if you feel that way as well, if you credit your meditation practice or perhaps other things just in the way of lifestyle or whatever else it might be. But do you feel that you've really become a changed person in the last 5 or so years?
Yeah, definitely. I have to like admit, like I was a little bit nervous before this like conversation, so it's not all like I'm some guy in a robe floating a couple inches above the ground. I still like feel things and still make mistakes, but there's definitely been a change in me through the practice of meditation. It's more of a it's hard to describe, I guess, but often people talk about it in terms of being less reactionary and more like responding more. It's also maybe a form of acceptance or capacity to hold uncertainties, probably become gentler and kinder to myself, probably become more cognitively flexible. As a result, there's less propensity to try and find a fixed model to approach things and more openness to kind of meet things where they are, opens up like the number of possibilities that one has in any situation, I guess, which has been fun.
Yeah. I can somewhat, I mean, I've meditated, and yeah, I've done yoga and some other stuff. Nothing like very much. But I feel like I'm sort of inclined towards a lot of the same things that you just mentioned, more so than most, but not as much, obviously, as a lot of others. And it's interesting. Like, there's this trying to think how to introduce this, but basically, there's this idea that I have that there are people who can like meditate for like 20 years. I'm just picking like an arbitrary, meditate for a long time, spend their whole life sort of like working on, quote unquote mindfulness and whatever else it might be. And over that time, they get better and better at, not living in their head, not having as many fears and whatnot, just all of sort of the, I can't list them as well, but like being more present in the moment, all of these sorts of, pretty objectively seemingly good things that come out of, these sorts of things like meditation and whatnot. And then you have, and they can get there. But it's always, there's always sort of like more work to be done, better. You can always sort of improve and whatnot. And then there's people like, I hesitate to use the example because people, react all sorts of ways or whatever. It's just a stigmatizing thing or whatever. But Trump is like, I look at someone like Trump and I'm like, he doesn't need to like learn to be present. Like he doesn't give a shit. Like he's gonna say what's on his mind. He's not gonna worry about what will so-and-so think of what I do here. Like he doesn't appear to have a ton of fears. But he, you try to get him to sit down for meditation and he's like, no thanks. And maybe not as politely. And so it's just sort of interesting. Like I bring this up because, like I said, I think I lean in the direction of, like my mother was quite spiritual or is quite spiritual. And so, primarily being, I had two great parents, but, just my dad worked a lot. And so she, spent a lot of time with my mom naturally, and her being spiritual, like you can only help that's going to rub off on you quite a bit. And, so with some of the things that you mentioned, just in terms of like comfort with the unknown, I think you described as like cognitive flexibility, not looking for as much of a, this is how you do this thing. So learn it, or you're not going to be able to like do it or figure it out or whatever, like all those things. I just sort of like lean in those directions.
Nice.
But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but it's just interesting to hear. Yeah. What did you say?
Trump is an interesting one.
Yeah.
Like,
do you see what I'm saying with that kind of?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. There seems to be a kind of self-assuredness to Trump that you could say is also a kind of or there's a similar kind of affect in people who are like practitioners of things, that they seem to be operating from a place of like stability or ability to just move through things without getting too caught up in their own heads. I'm not too sure that, one of the things, I guess Trump isn't universally liked. I'm not sure that anybody is, but I don't know. I guess maybe then it becomes more about like externalities. Like, I guess it comes back to like, what kind of world do you want to live in? And I'm not sure what kind of world Trump wants to live in. But maybe there are more, when you invite more ways of thinking, or you have more cognitive flexibility alongside that self-assuredness, maybe there's more skillful actions available to you to move through kind of situations to kind of not only better your own life, but the lives of others that maybe Trump isn't totally tapped into all the time. I don't know though. Maybe he is. Maybe Trump is some kind of, maybe, you could say that if there's some kind of overarching God or something that's writing this all out, Trump's playing some kind of part that leads to an unfolding that is ultimately good. Yeah.
How do you, if you don't mind talking about it, and you don't have to, but like, how does religion, you mentioned like church as a kid, just now, the possibility that there is like, some larger God or whatever you might call it, pulling the strings. How does that, or does that sort of intersect with your meditation practice, yoga, things like that?
Yeah, I guess it does. I guess like where the thoughts come from is a good way to maybe talk about this. Like in meditation, sitting down, watching my own mind, there's maybe the kind of thinking where I can direct it. And then there's also just the thought of what am I going to have for lunch that pops up after I've been thinking about something seemingly more serious. There's some lack of control in the unfolding of conscious experience that also seems to have kept me alive so far. So yeah, I don't really know what to do with it. I'm not sure that I am someone who says that there's definitely a God and everyone should think that. But nor do I think that, the religions that believe in a God are wrong. I think there's something that all the religions are perhaps tapping into that tasks everybody who practices within them to kind of look towards similar kinds of worlds or ways of being. I think you could compare Jesus and the Buddha in a way. They were both people who were spreading a message and living in a way that seemed to help the people around them.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's like a simple but fundamental and true way of comparing the two. And I tend to share your view there as well, which is I don't like subscribe to a particular religion, but I have a lot of respect for a lot of religions and religious people, people of faith. Like I like sports, and so you'll watch often like a football game in particular. Like football players seem to be particularly religious, I guess, versus other sports maybe not. I don't know, but a lot of times you'll see like a post-game interview and they'll say, all credit to God and things like this. And you can really just like, I mean, maybe not all of them, but some of like a lot of them, you can really see like that they mean it. I mean, the extreme example would be like a Tim Tebow, if you're familiar, where these guys are just sort of out there doing their thing. And there's just a tremendous amount of faith that, like, there's also this guy, I'm trying to remember this story. This guy played basketball at Florida University, got paralyzed in like a really bad, just sort of tragic and unfortunate accident. He was like this, stud athlete, and suddenly wheelchair for life, and came out of it all. Like, I read his book and came out of it all with just like such a positive perspective from basically leaning on his religion. And I just think that's like such a powerful thing where it's like, for me personally, like, I don't think it really matters if you're right or wrong, if there's even any way to say. It's sort of going back to what I said earlier on climate change. It's like, I tend to believe that if you can't know something, it doesn't hurt to believe like sort of the thing that's going to be more useful or like beneficial or even just pleasant to believe. And so, if you can't know if there is a God, or if you're a certain religion, if your exact religion is correct in every way or some ways, or which ways it is and which ways it isn't, like, if you have confidence that having faith in it all is good for you, then like it probably will be, is sort of my view. And I think you can find that in Catholicism or Buddhism or, Judaism or anything. And maybe not anything, but a lot of these, a lot of religions and other sort of quasi religions for that matter as well.
Yeah.
So, but I don't, I haven't really developed the spiritual side quite as much. And just to sort of, bring that from more of a conceptual thing to concrete, like what, we talked about sort of early on, like in college, I think, going back to your room and meditating and things, but like, what's your, these days, what are the things that you're actually doing to maintain this practice, or does it not require very much maintenance? Are you, meditating this way for this much time, or doing yoga? Are there other components? Is it writing and doing other things?
Yeah. So I have a daily meditation practice. So I would meditate for, I think it was 50 minutes this morning. And
50?
50, yeah.
Okay.
And just before we got into the call, I did a little extra meditation for like 12 minutes or something. The meditation is,
sorry to interrupt, but that's 50 every morning, roughly.
Yeah, roughly. I mean, one of the things I think is like, I don't want to make it into something that I don't want to do.
Right.
So I'm relatively flexible with it. So for instance, I might meditate on the train some days for like 10 minutes. But usually if I'm at home, 45 minutes in the morning on the cushion is kind of like what I aim for. And if I miss a day, I miss a day. If I don't hit 45 minutes, I don't hit 45 minutes. Because I haven't got time, usually I'll maybe just do 20 or 30 minutes. And if I decide I want to do an hour, some days I'll do an hour. So it's like, whatever works.
Yeah. And I don't want to approach this as if I'm like seeking a prescription or trying to like get you to prescribe, myself or anyone listening for like, this is the right way to do it. I'm more so just asking from curiosity as to your, what has been, where you've come to personally, what works for you, not to suggest that it's, but I'm very basically suspect of, this is the way to do it or whatever. And so, and I don't want you to feel, like you're sort of doing that, but, I'm curious to get into sort of the nitty gritty of like, are you setting a timer? Is this like you're waking up and you're meditating as the very first thing you do? Like, what are the sort of granular details of the meditation for you? And have they changed over time, like near term, or it's been like this for quite a while?
I can give you granular details in terms of like technique. So, but in terms of like when I do it, I try and do it in the morning after I wake up. But that might be before or after breakfast. I'm really quite flexible with it, I think. It hasn't always been like that. I used to do like strictly 20 minutes every morning. I've done strictly 1 hour every morning. I've done not meditating for 4 weeks and then meditating for 4 weeks. I went to India recently and didn't meditate at all, but I was doing a lot of like internal mantra repetition. It's more so about returning to the present moment. And like one of my teachers called David Nickturn, he has this turn of phrase, which is suddenly free from fixed mind. And so it's just kind of remembering it's like openness as an authority. Like any direction is possible from here, but it's also an entire acknowledgement and acceptance of kind of the reality of what's here. Because, I can go along believing that I can cross the road, and because there's some kind of thing looking after me that I won't get run over, but the reality is that I might get run over. So, openness is kind of the practice. And meditation, sitting down every day, is finding a posture which is kind of supportive of returning my attention to the breath over and over again in a kind of relaxed and gentle manner.
And do you typically, like I understand the start time is variable and it's very different, but it's maybe somewhat analogous. Like I to try to relate it to, my own experience. I'm like what I started fasting, like intermittent fasting, I don't know, 7 years ago or something. And in the beginning it was like, stop eating at 8 p.m. and don't eat until 12 noon the next day. And it was pretty rigid, like, and heavily defined, similar to, 20 minutes every morning or 60 minutes every morning or 4 weeks on, 4 weeks off. And then now, it's been several years, I still intermittent fast basically, but I don't even really think, like, it doesn't even like, it's not something I think about ever. It's just most mornings I don't eat, and most nights I don't eat late night. And like, there's no specific time. I'm never looking at the clock. If I'm hungry late night, I'll eat, or even if I'm not hungry. And I just, and it's not like the best thing ever. I don't believe it's good for me, but once in a while, late night, you want to eat, even if you're not hungry, and I'll eat. Cause like, it's just, it's fine. But overall, with all of that added up, like I still basically am roughly intermittent fasting, call it, 16 hours a day or whatever, 4 or 5 days a week, maybe 6, like on average, probably 5 days a week on average over, years. And I would have a tough time describing to someone, are you setting a timer for when it's time to eat again or whatever? It's like, no, like none of that. It's just how I operate basically. The difficult part for me is that as I've tried meditating in the past, it's been something that has required intention. I don't find myself naturally responding to something by sort of being prompted to meditate. However, I could imagine that after perhaps practicing a more fixed practice for some period of time with a little bit more structure, a little bit more regularity, perhaps you sort of develop, like, to me, it's hard for me to imagine what you described of like, sometimes I meditate before breakfast, sometimes I meditate after, sometimes I do it for 40 minutes, sometimes I do it for an hour, because I'm like, well, how do you know what to do on a given day? But if it's anything like sort of like the fasting, maybe it requires a bit of structure up front over really, fairly long period of time to then eventually be so accustomed to it that you can basically just flow with it as you've described, in a way that maybe like, I would have quite a difficult time doing in regards to like meditation.
Yeah, I think because I've been meditating, I would say I've probably been meditating regularly for about 8 or 9 years, with kind of maybe months or two, like near the beginning, I would take 1 month or 2 months off occasionally because I thought, I've cracked it and I'm good. And then realize that, oh no, the mind is kind of collecting and accumulating things all the time. And this is a practice helps to navigate. And so, yeah, I just kind of like playing. I kind of want to say it's like learning an instrument, where you learn the scales at first and then eventually you can kind of play. But there is a specificity to how you play an instrument, in the same way there's a specificity to the way that meditation practice unfolds. But it is kind of like an art practice. Like your experience of meditation at the beginning is going to be different to your experience of meditation a week in. Even through one meditation sit, I could get to a peak of really, really wanting to stand up and give up. And then the next 10 minutes after that peak has kind of peaked are kind of more peaceful and relaxed somehow, even though 10 minutes ago I was like on the burning edge of wanting to stand up. And then over time, I guess I've just began to trust the practice more and more, that it's the things that arise whilst I'm sitting are things that, when allowed to unfold in their own naturality, are um, are kind of ultimately beneficial, or the practice is ultimately beneficial, or has been the way that I've been practicing it.
Are there other things that you do, such as yoga or anything else that's really that even compares to the impact you feel that meditation has had for you over the years, or is meditation really the main sort of piece?
I would say books and psychedelics, probably the two things that kind of, I would say, weave into the whole thing.
Okay, interesting. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so books is like studying. So you read how other people have related to the experience of having a mind that thinks and a body that feels and a life that is full of uncertainties. So there's many people who've studied different spiritual paths or done different spiritual practices that kind of describe things in ways that help me to relate to my own experience. So I've done a lot of reading of different Buddhist teachers, majority, some kind of, I'm reading Miles Davis's autobiography at the moment, which is interesting.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is there a balance between reading people who are explicitly sort of writing about the relationship versus others where the lessons or the perspective that you can take away from might be just more implicit, and they're not explicitly sort of studying, how people, like basically what you said.
Yeah. There's a balance. I mean, the stuff which is written with the intention of like delivering some kind of wisdom is often more potent. But I think the stuff like Miles Davis's autobiography, there's implicit stuff that maybe is a bit more subtle sometimes, or there's maybe it's even more relatable at times. Would probably be the best way to put it. But there is good stuff in the stuff that is explicitly, I'm looking at a book right now called Diligence by a Tibetan Buddhist teacher. And that's just like his whole job is to teach meditation and Buddhist thought. So that stuff is like every other sentence is like, oh shit, I can stew on that,
Yeah. Do you have a like a holy grail of your favorite or top few of these sorts of books?
The book that I started with was by a Vietnamese Buddhist monk called Thich Nhat Hanh. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King Jr. And he wrote a book called The Miracle of Mindfulness. And then there's Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. He's written books. Meditation in Action is a good one. Yeah, those two come to mind.
Interesting. And are these like, what's the experience like of reading those sorts of books? Are they long? Are the sentences is it difficult to understand, or is it um, something where you kind of need to like sit and think after each sentence because there's just so much sort of like packed in, like you described?
Yeah. I mean, occasionally it's like music. So it just like hits you in the right spot. And there's not really, you don't have to think about it. Occasionally I can reread a sentence multiple times. Other times a sentence will come back to me like 5, 6 months later and it'll apply to a situation. I'll be like, oh yeah, that is true here as well. Um, these two books I've just mentioned are really quite short, small books. Um, the experience of reading them is that you could probably read them multiple times over the course of a lifetime and get something different out of them every time.
Right. That's great. I appreciate those recommendations, and will I'm noting them. I need to look back. I know I can't even pronounce. I know the first guy that you said. I can't pronounce his name. If you did it again, maybe I could. The second guy sounds like I need to go back and work a little bit before I could even come close to that pronunciation. But I will sort of run this back and grab those titles because I've enjoyed the conversation, and I think I have I feel like I could I'm sort of due to read something like this. I'm not in that it's like necessarily a requirement or anything or an obligation, but I just feel like I've been going like very fast lately. And I feel like I enjoy the seasonality between living what I can best describe as sort of fast and slow. And recently I've been fast and I've been slow many times before. And I feel like I could use a dose of slow, which I feel like one or both of those books would almost definitely give me. So I'll definitely check those out. And the reason I asked about sort of the experience of reading and things is I have a complicated relationship with reading, but I enjoy books that are short, is the bottom line, and not overly complicated. And of course, there's always, you can infinitely, find more and more in anything. But if it can be sort of read in a way that is more easy and not like sort of a daunting thing where I have to like really work to try to understand what's going on here, I can just sort of read. And if I get it, I do. And if I don't, I don't. I can spend time on what I want to spend time on, or if the thing hits in the right way, like you described with the music, then it hits in the right way, then that's great. And so basically all that you described sounds good to me. The last thing, maybe, well, I don't know if it's the last thing, but one other thing, as I know we're coming up on time, is the trip to India. What was that all about?
Yeah, nothing spiritual really. Just my girlfriend's father had a job there he was coming to the end of his contract, so they sorted us out a little trip around a few places. I'd never been before, but it was awesome. Yeah. You said you've done some traveling. Have you been?
Sorry, say it again.
You said you've done some traveling in the past. Have you been?
I have not been to India, no, but it seems like a unique experience potentially compared to a lot of other travel that I've done, and I would be sort of interested in, I don't know how deep of one, but I'd at least like to explore some of the spiritual elements if I were to go. Like I feel like that would be a large part of why I would be going, even if it doesn't, even if I don't sort of necessarily get as much out of it as someone who's more into a lot of it. I just feel like it would be really interesting, and I like sort of occasional shock to the system if I can find it.
Yeah, definitely a shock to the system. It's
so were you able to do any of that while you were out there, or not really that much?
No. I was, as I say, I wasn't really meditating even in the mornings. I was just doing all this internal mantra. I was saying Om Mani Peme Hung, which is like a Tibetan mantra. I'd just say that whilst we were in the car to different places in my in my own mind, or walking around when I had some time. Um, yeah, I didn't do much spiritual stuff over there. Obviously, we visited different temples and things. But no, the main thing that stood out to me was there's kind of like a smell terrain. Like I was very conscious of smells and how they changed, like even within like 3 meters or something.
So there was just a lot of different smells, basically. Or
Yeah, there was a lot of different intense smells. In smaller areas than I would imagine smells to change. Like, or maybe I was just more conscious of being, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, that's such an interesting, specific observation. Like that there were bold smells is one thing, but like that they changed within small areas is interesting. It's just like I feel like that has to be a it's not something that you would or sort of like could make up, basically. Like that must be strong. Like it's easy to notice something that you're looking out for, because you sort of have a bias to see it. But I don't think you would have gone to India with the mindset of, oh, I'm going to notice surprisingly bold changes in smell and like between small areas when I go there. And yet that happened. And so like, it must really have been pretty potent.
Yeah, at the beginning I was noticing a lot. So I did eventually like, I'm going to pay attention to this now that we're in a new place, but.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah, so I would like to go, but I don't know when that will be. And similarly with the slow and the fast living, I've had sort of chapters of travel. And
where's your favorite place you've been?
First that comes to mind would be Italy. I studied there for 4 months, so I really lived there. So that's really the only place that I've traveled internationally that came to feel like home. But secondarily, I also spent a few weeks in Japan and really enjoyed that. And both of those had a lot to do with the context of my life at those points. The first was, studying abroad in college, which is a very sort of unique time. And then the second in Japan was right after I'd quit my job. I went and I spent a week in Italy with my now wife, girlfriend at the time, and then went to Paris on my own for 10 days, and then Copenhagen for a few days, and went to Copenhagen so that I could get a flight to Japan to meet my friend who was in the middle of traveling the world. And so we just sort of, jumped between hostels in Japan for, I think it was around 3 weeks, and very cool experience. Very, like I said, it's, Japan itself is awesome, but also for me to go from, a number of weeks earlier, waking up and doing the investment banking grind in Manhattan, to waking up in a hostel in Japan and living on like $50 a day, totally resetting my cost of living, totally resetting my perspective on like what a day can be, or a week, or life, was really cool. And my buddy was fortunately like sort of already in this mode from months of traveling before I met with him. So I was able to sort of just like dive right in. But yeah, both Italy and Japan, I would love to go. I'll definitely, I've been back to Italy a bunch since, and Japan I haven't been back, but I would love to. My wife's never been. And yeah, really cool. I love traveling. I think traveling is like this very fundamental sort of thing for humans, where we, for the majority of our species history, have not actually spent like our whole lives in one place. We've, roamed around. And so I don't know, I think there's something to just like the enjoyment of traveling in and of itself. I think like if people didn't have jobs, I think a lot of people would just be like perennially traveling, basically. And obviously you see this with digital nomads and whatnot, but yeah, it's its own flavor. So So yeah, how about you on the travel front? Any favorites that stick out?
I think my favorite, I would love to go to Japan. I've never been to Japan. And it's, I think what you would point to there when you said like it changes how you look at a day, like that's kind of my favorite thing about traveling is like changes how I'm approaching things. My favorite places have been probably, I went to Nepal. That was amazing. The Himalayas are insane. And the people are lovely. And I guess I did a lot of hiking in New Zealand, on the South Island.
Mm,
I'm a bit of a sucker for mountains and sunrises and sunsets. So that was amazing too.
awesome. Lastly, we got time for one more, sort of a specific and more of a general question. You mentioned when you started getting into, or not when you started getting into meditation, but when you started the formal training, you weren't thinking of teaching so much, but it's sort of a prerequisite for getting through it, and you ended up, sounds like, enjoying it and doing more of it. So curious to hear about like your experience with teachings in this realm, and then separately, I believe you were doing something with hire related to, like it seemed like you were hosting TED sessions and teaching, and I believe you even people were actually getting paid just to join these things, which is really interesting. And you know, it's like seems like what's the catch? But I think you made it work. So maybe you could talk about teaching both in the general and the specific with the higher related, thing that you were doing.
Yeah, so the higher thing didn't come together in the end. But the the experience of teaching is a little bit like that. Really, you can only really teach if, um, or I've found that I can only really teach if someone wants to enter into that kind of relationship. And I don't even really like the word teacher or teaching. That sounds trite to say. There is a exchange that's happening, but it's basically just being a friend who knows a bit more about how to practice being present. Um,
Mm,
there's there's not much more to it than that, really. It's kind of, and I'm it's basically like I've made some mistakes, and so when somebody first gets into practice or they're some stage along of practicing, we can talk through kind of what the experience has been and what perhaps might be happening, what perhaps might not be happening, um, and kind of just I don't really bring answers. I bring more questions than anything else in the work that I do. And the higher thing was supposed to be kind of a long series where I'd be funded to kind of basically pay people to meditate. And there really wasn't a catch to it, except that the people who would fund it would lose money. um, in that there wasn't anything coming back. It would just be people being incentivized to come and take time to learn how to meditate, get paid for it at the same time. So yeah, that didn't work out. Um, but a few people have reached out and said, what is it that you do? Can we chat? And we've chatted and worked together, and they've experienced some benefit, which is amazing to me. The last person I worked with on a donation basis, and they paid me not a small amount at the end of our working together, which was kind of awesome and validating, and feels really good. But yeah, instead, I was doing the higher mindfulness club thing, and part of the reason for doing that also was to kind of bring people in the higher community together to be in conversation. So there was going to be an aspect of meditating and learning how to meditate, but there was also going to be an aspect of kind of meeting other people in the community and being in conversation, because I think there's real value in working things out in real time, having conversations with people who are curious and interested, people who might have things to share or things that they're personally passionate or interested in making a reality. So I've kind of moved towards kind of facilitating that in a slightly different way, where I basically do this thing which is a weekly gathering called Beings Club, where there's some time up front for people to engage a practice of their own, whatever they decide they want to do. So some people want to meditate, and I'll offer to do a guided meditation if people want to do that. But actually, most weeks, nobody wants that, and I just meditate. So you can watch me seemingly stare at a wall whilst you, some people gratitude journal, drink a cup of tea, do some art, build a mini app. People have been doing all sorts of things. And then there's 2 30-minute blocks where people basically have conversations, either one-to-one or in a small group of 3. And there's no themes, no prompts. It's just kind of, you're dropped into the same space. And the invitation is to be curious, because I kind of believe that curiosity connects.
Interesting. And so that's basically the format for Beings Club. It's sort of free to, anyone can do whatever they want. And then it's sort of that time is, interspersed between 2 30-minute sessions. People.
Yeah. So the time to do what you want up front. The time to do what you want comes up front, basically. And so I'll offer to guide a meditation if people want that. But many weeks, people have said, no, we'll do our own thing. And the idea is that you kind of engage a practice of your own that you want to do. So you kind of carve out some time for yourself and do something intentional.
And how long is that beginning part?
It's about 25 minutes.
Okay, so 25 minutes of that, and then it's the back-to-back 2 different, either one-on-one or 3-person conversations, or there's gaps more between?
No, it's back-to-back. So 30 minutes.
So the whole thing's like, hour and a half, something?
Yeah.
Nice. That's interesting. I feel like, and everyone's gathered on like Zoom or something?
Yeah, Zoom.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. The beginning part, I can understand the conversational pieces, because it's basically, as you now know, what I do here is jump on the phone with someone I have the ideas interesting, and I know, coming in, I might, know varying things about them. I might know very, very little or quite a lot. And regardless, just jump into a conversation and go with the flow. And it generally ends up being enjoyable and interesting and all the above. But the beginning part is more foreign to me, and just seems interesting in that, like, everyone can join and do their own thing, from meditating to just chilling with a cup of tea or building a mini app. It's like so many things of such variety, but the fact that everyone just jumps in to do them together, and it's like sort of known, like, this is the period of time for that, and after that we're going to have some conversations and then we'll call it a day. Seems like a good time. So how can people can people get involved in that? Do you have like open slots, or is it like something that you want to keep relatively small?
I do want to keep it relatively small, but we do have open slots. And there's going to be a way for people to try it out for free, see if they want to get involved, basically, because it is a paid membership. So essentially, you'd want to go to the Beings Club channel on Warpcast, so it's beings-club, or space2be.xyz/open. Yeah, I've got this thing that I want it to be relatively small, so that people, like, the conversations that people have are with people that they eventually get to know, real relationships can form, and hopefully some people do some cool stuff together. But yeah, at the moment it's been relatively small. 6 or 7 people were part of the first 3 months. We had a break whilst I was in India, and we're coming back on May 18th for this open, free-for-all kind of come if you want kind of salon, and then after that will be members only.
Nice. And what do you think is the range of like a good number for this sort of thing?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it. There's Dunbar's number, but even that seems like it might be a bit too high.
Yeah.
Um, Someone said to me the other day, maybe it's like classroom size, so like 30 to 40, which feels about right. But also think that we might be able to double that to maybe 60 and it still be okay because maybe not everyone's going to turn up every week. That's kind of, people should have their lives alongside this cool thing. So yeah, maybe 60s around the max.
Yeah, I know Phil from Warpcast, who his friend of mine, he's talked about like trying to find that ideal size. I think at the time when he was like, he put out a survey for it. I think it was for a book club that he was doing at the time. And it's just an interesting question. There's like the right size for all these different things that is variable, like the right size for a group chat, the right size for a book club, the right size for what you're doing, classroom, et cetera, and then all the way up to Dunbar's number and whatnot. And I don't know the right answer for any of these things, but it's always just sort of interesting to consider because I think the dynamics just change so significantly. Maybe not on the increment between 50 and 51 people, but the difference between 60 and 20, like the whole thing can change potentially. And so finding what the right number is an interesting question, I think. But I mean, you're starting with, 6 or 7, seems clear that it should be able to handle more than that in a way that probably will be additive.
Yeah,
And
I feel really lucky. I feel lucky
yeah,
that it's like been so small so far. Um, and it's been going to be a slow burn if it continues long into the future because it's an experiment, really.
cool. Well, hopefully some, maybe a couple people will listen to this and check that out. I'd be interested in joining for one of the, one of the early sort of test runs, just seeing what it's all about. Um, and yeah, I appreciate you taking the time today and enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one, man. Bye bye.
Okay. Great.